Barron Trump had always lived a life where everything seemed to come easily. Surrounded by luxury, security, and constant attention, he rarely experienced the feeling of uncertainty that most people face daily. But on this particular evening, as he walked down the streets of New York, something felt off. The city, usually full of life and noise, seemed strangely quiet. The usual vibrance felt like it had been replaced with an eerie stillness. He was lost in his thoughts, reflecting on the event he had just attended at school, when a turn down an unfamiliar street caught his attention. It was quieter here, more hidden away from the bustling life he was used to. As he walked further, something caught his eye, something that didn't belong. Barron stopped dead in his tracks. There, sitting on the cold steps of an old building, was a figure he never expected to see in this part of town, let alone in such a state. Mrs. Thompson, his former teacher. Mrs. Thompson, who had always been confident, poised, and commanding, someone who had guided him through history's most profound lessons, was now sitting on the ground, her head lowered, wrapped in ragged clothing, clearly lost in despair. The woman who once commanded a classroom full of students was now broken, lost in a world Barron had never known. His heart raced as he took a step closer, unsure if what he was seeing was real. Could it be? Was this some kind of mistake? Mrs. Thompson, a teacher he had admired, was homeless? "Mrs. Thompson?" Barron called out, his voice hesitant, unsure if she would recognize him or even care. She looked up slowly, her face tired and gaunt, her eyes hollow and distant. There was no recognition in her gaze at first, but then something flickered. She straightened a bit and wiped a tear from her cheek before offering a faint, almost sad smile. "Barron, I didn't expect to see you here," she said, her voice soft and shaky. Barron swallowed, his mind racing. "What happened? How did you end up like this?" Mrs. Thompson sighed deeply and looked away, unable to meet his eyes. She took a moment before she spoke, her voice filled with both pain and resignation. "I don't know how it happened either. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. One minute, I was teaching history, shaping minds, believing I could make a difference. The next, everything fell apart. Personal loss, financial struggles. The system failed me, Barron. It all just unraveled." Barron stood there in shock. This couldn't be happening. Mrs. Thompson, the woman who had inspired him, who had always seemed so in control, so strong, was now living in despair. She wasn't just an ordinary teacher. She had been a role model, someone who made a lasting impact on everyone who crossed her path. "What happened to you?" Barron asked, struggling to find the right words. You were always so strong, so sure of everything." Mrs. Thompson's lips trembled as she let out a small laugh, bitter and hollow. "Strong? Sure? I was pretending, Barron. Every day I was pretending to have it all together. But behind that mask, there was always something breaking. I lost my family. I lost my job. And eventually, I lost myself. It wasn't sudden. It was a series of small decisions, things that seemed harmless at the time. But in the end, they led me here." Barron could hardly process what she was saying. He felt guilty for having had everything handed to him so easily, for never understanding the weight of the struggles that people like Mrs. Thompson faced. He couldn't fathom how someone so intelligent, so passionate, could end up living on the streets. "I can help," Barron said before he could stop himself. His mind raced with solutions, his family, his name, their connections. He could fix this. He had to fix this. "I'll talk to my dad. My mom. We can—" "No," Mrs. Thompson interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. She shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with a sadness Barron had never seen before. "It's not that simple. You can't just throw money at it and make it go away. This isn't about fixing me, Barron. This is about something deeper. Sometimes the things you lose can't be replaced with anything, not even money or power." Barron stood there, stunned. He had always thought that money and influence were the solutions to everything. After all, they had always solved his problems. But now, as he faced the raw reality of Mrs. Thompson's life, he realized how naive he had been. She paused for a moment, looking at the ground before continuing. You have no idea what it's like to watch everything you've worked for, everything you've believed in, slip through your fingers. It's like drowning in a sea of disappointment and regret, and there's no one to save you. Barron could feel the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't just a teacher. She was a person with dreams, hopes, and a life that had been shattered. And in that moment, Barron felt a deep sense of responsibility. His life had been so different from hers, so sheltered, that he had never understood the kind of struggle she was describing. But now, as he stood before her, he could feel the pain in her voice, the loneliness in her eyes, and it broke his heart. I don't know what to do, Barron admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I wish I could make it better. I wish I could fix everything. Mrs. Thompson looked up at him, her gaze softening just a little. There's nothing to fix, Barron. Not everything can be fixed. But maybe you can help others, in small ways. Maybe you can make a difference for someone else before it's too late. Because the world needs more than just money. It needs people who care. Barron nodded, feeling a weight settle on his chest. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know how to solve everything. But he knew one thing. He couldn't just walk away from this. He had to do something. He had to make sure that the world understood that there was more to life than wealth and status. There was more to success than power. There was compassion, understanding, and the ability to give a damn about people. As Barron walked away from that street corner, a sense of determination filled him. He knew that things couldn't change overnight, but he was going to try. He began volunteering at local charities, helping those who were struggling, trying to make a difference in his own way. And every time he thought of Mrs. Thompson, he was reminded that change started with small acts of kindness, with truly seeing the people around him. Months passed, and Barron's efforts slowly began to grow. His understanding of the world deepened. He realized that success wasn't about wealth or connections. It was about making a difference, about standing up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. As for Mrs. Thompson, though she wasn't fully healed, she began to rebuild her life. Barron's willingness to listen, his genuine care, had sparked something in her. A flicker of hope that had been buried for so long. And Barron knew, deep down, that he wasn't the same person who had walked down those streets that cold evening. The world was bigger than he had ever imagined, and it was his responsibility to be a part of its change. If you've ever been moved by this story or felt inspired to make a difference in your own way, share your thoughts with us. Leave a comment below, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can keep up with new stories. Together, we can make a difference, one small step at a time.